associated with this data. For instance, if a user is trying to get access to a building and the PIN is manipulated, then he may not be able to enter the building. Or if the smart card has been damaged physically, there can be lack of availability of the PIN to be transmitted for the remote server and to get access to the building. Then coming to remote user authentication mechanisms, again, against online frauds. So there is a need to understand how remote user authentication schemes basically work. They provide remote accessibility of the resources, regardless of the physical location of the person. So you may sit anywhere across the world and you can use the security pin of your card and you can access any remote application using these mechanisms. And they provide authenticity to you as well as the remote application server, because it is necessary to identify which parties are actually the part of the communication. So to authenticate them, it is necessary to implement these schemes. So smart cards, they may store some parameters associated with remote user authentication. And these are particularly employed in e-commerce, net banking, and automated teller machines. The schemes, they can be based on a single factor for authentication, or there can be multiple factors working simultaneously. For instance, if you want to authenticate yourself, you can use just the card, the physical device, or you can use a password which is obtained on your mobile phone or some other device linked to the card. Then there can be biometrics as well, where you can submit your fingerprints, etc., to identify yourself. And there can be one-time passwords that are normally applicable for single transactions. So if we talk about the security attacks that foster the online frauds associated with remote user authentication mechanisms in smart cards, we have a long list starting from stolen smart card attack, in which the physical smart card, if it is actually stolen, then the attacker can use the necessary information to obtain the user specific information. For instance, on your physical device, there is on the back side of your smart card, there is a 3-digit or 4-digit PIN. So normally people don't care about that, but you should actually rub it in order to avoid any misuse of the key to obtain your credentials or to save your data. Then DNS spoofing can be there, in which the domain name server, it can be spoofed with respect to its identity, and a genuine user using the smart card based application can be redirected to a spoofed server, and the user is not aware about that in this case. So the next one is session key disclosure, in which the key associated with an ongoing session between the user and the application server can be stolen. And then there can be stolen verifier attack, in which the verifying information, the parameters associated with the communication, can be stolen by the attacker, and the attacker can act as a genuine user of the communication. There can be brute force attacks, in which an attacker can try all possible passwords or pins in order to access the application on behalf of a genuine user. There can be parallel session attacks, in which a user, he's in an ongoing session, and an attacker can also establish a parallel session, and he can actually see what's going on in the original session. So the next one is plain text attack, in which the attacker can utilize the plain text and ciphertext pair in order to identify the secret key of the transition. And this is basically associated with the cryptographic algorithm of the smart card based application. Then there can be insider attacks, in which a person who is working in an organization can actually reveal the secret information about the users to someone else. For instance, a person who is working in a smart card based organization, which is basically providing smart card based services to the user. The person can reveal the information about the users stored in their database. Then there can be replay attacks in which the information once captured can be retransmitted with modification. For instance, if as a user, you're trying to access a remote application by providing your password, the attacker can actually trace that password and he can modify it and he can retransmit it to the server to block the access. Then there can be relay attacks in which the attacker will try to initiate the communication from both the parties. He will pretend that he is a genuine party and he can relay messages with them. There can be remote server attacks in which an attacker can access the remote application server, which is installed to conduct the transactions, and he can install malicious software in the server to hinder its functionality. There can be reflection attack in which an attacker can send false response packets to the target application server or any client by pretending that it's the target IP address. So it will appear that the messages are coming from that device, but actually this is not the case. Then there can be masquerade attack in which an attacker can pretend by using the genuine IDs and password of the actual users that he is a genuine person and he can access the application. Then there can be modification attack, which is again against the security integrity of the information that is being transmitted. There can be man-in-the-middle attacks in which the attacker can act as a person who is trying to observe the information, the ongoing transmission, to capture the key information. Then there can be forward secrecy attack in which it is again associated with the cryptographic algorithm, in which an attacker can use cryptanalysis techniques to identify the encrypted messages without using the keys. So the idea is to reveal the key by observing the plain text and corresponding ciphertext of the ongoing transmission. So to deal with these attacks, we in our lab, we developed a prototype. So I will try to introduce what are the available schemes, remote user authentication schemes based on different models, starting from RSA-based schemes in which the security of the scheme, it is dependent on the problem of factoring large prime numbers, where the underlying mechanism is it involves the choosing a large prime number, and it cannot be factored in a polynomial time. So since an attacker is a polynomial time adversary, it cannot do this. Then algamel-based schemes are also there, in which the discrete logarithmic problem, which is difficult to compute in polynomial time, it's kept as the basis for the security of the underlying scheme. Then there can be hash-based schemes in which the security relies on the hash function. Basically, hash function is responsible for taking your password, which can be of varying size, and it generates a fixed size output corresponding to that password. So one cannot identify the original password if the hash function is strong enough. Then there can be ECC based schemes in which the security relies on the reduced key sizes, and it basically implements discrete logarithmic problem, which is again difficult to be solved in polynomial time. Then there can be biometrics based schemes in which the biometric information of the user is used for identification and authentication, and these basically target the forgery attacks because biometrics are normally unique, so one cannot pretend as a genuine user. Then there can be OTP-based schemes in which a one-time password is received on the linked device, and if you are the person holding the device, then one cannot misuse the ongoing communication. but there is a lack. If the device is stolen, then an attacker can actually get the OTP and can use it to get involved in the communication. So we mainly focused on elliptic curve cryptography and for developing the remote user authentication mechanism. So this ECC was proposed by Koblitz and Miller as a public key crypto system in which there is a private key and a public key of the client associated with the communication. So the private key is known to the client only, and public key is exposed to all the communicating parties. And the key point about ECC is that it provides better security and better performance with smaller key sizes, unlike conventional cryptographic schemes. And it is therefore suitable for resource constrained devices. For instance, a smart card is a resource constrained device considering the memory and performance limitations. So this cryptographic scheme is suitable for such devices. So it involves an elliptic curve if you talk about the fundamental logic of ECC, and it basically works over finite prime field, and the corresponding equation is shown. As you can see, y square is equal to x cube plus ax plus b mod p. Here a and b are two parameters, and x and y correspond to the points in the elliptic curve, and p is considered as greater than 3, and there is another condition associated with it, that 4a cube plus 27b square is not equal to 0 mod p. So here a and b, basically there is a relationship between them, mathematical relationship, and they should satisfy this equation. So if we consider S as a point on elliptic curve, then and M as an integer, there is a point multiplication operation that is represented by MS equal to S plus, and so on. So basically it's like representing a multiplication operation in terms of addition of points. And the scheme also involved a collision resistant one-way hash function. So basically the property of this function says that once you provide an input to this function and the output is generated, it cannot be reverted back because it is irreversible. So the input can be of any arbitrary size, but the output string is of fixed length, which is n in this case. Then a threat model was also adopted, and the threat model was proposed by Dollar Viao. So it has some attributes. An adversary in case of a communication can be an intruder, a registered server, or a registered or false user of the underlying system. So if there is a smart card based communication going on, then a remote application server can also act as an adversary. A user of the owner of the card himself can act as an adversary. And the adversary has the capability to capture the messages during the ongoing transmission. This is an assumption. Then an adversary can also reroute, recast, delete, or replay the messages captured by him. And he can also introduce new messages in the communication channel. So keeping these assumptions in mind, we proposed a scheme, which is a multi-factor remote authentication scheme. It utilizes the biometric information of the user, the one-time passwords, and the elliptic curve cryptography. And it is targeted for multi-server environment in which the smart card based application can be deployed on multiple application servers in parallel. So the system entities are the user, the owner of the card, basically, the smart card itself, the remote application server on which the application has been deployed, the authentication server, which is responsible for executing the remote user authentication mechanism, then the management server, which is responsible for defining or storing the policies associated with the communication, and the client application, which is normally present on the client device. So if we talk about the phases of the remote user authentication scheme that we proposed, it started with initial setup phase in which a user sends the registration request to the authentication server by providing its identifying information. And the authentication server stores that information and issues a smart card to the user. Similarly, the application server, it needs to be registered. So it sends its identifying information and it gets a registration response in return. So once the registration is done, the client application, it sends its application label to the smart card, and this label along with the user's anonymous information is sent to the management server. Here, the management servers will define the policies, the security policies, the access control policies based on the identity of the user. For instance, a user can be a normal user or a person working in some company. So based on these details, policies are defined for providing access to them. And these policies and some are stored there, and the security level information is sent to the user. The security level information, basically it's a unique identity, and the user is not aware about the background details of it. It's just like a label. So once it is assigned to the user has the card now with the necessary information. It can enter the credentials in the client application. So the information is sent in the form of a login request to the application server, and the application server forwards this request to the authentication server along with its necessary information. So now the authentication server has the user specific details and the application server specific details. After checking the same, after verifying the same, it sends an authentication response to the application server, which in turn is sent to the user. So it's like first level of authentication. So once this response is received by the user, the user will send the information in the form of a fact, an assertion basically, to say that I have this information, and along this information is forwarded to the application server again, and the combined packet is sent to authentication server. So the authentication server will verify if this fact is what I sent to the user and application server initially. So once this assertion is verified, the user can access the remote application through the client application. So this model basically provides two levels of security, in which first the user and application server will receive some identifying information to prove themselves later in the second phase. So talking about the security aspects of the scheme, they again rely on the two key problems associated with elliptic curve cryptography. The first one is elliptic curve discrete logarithmic problem. So this is again related to the mathematical notions, in which if we consider 2 points on the elliptic curve, P and Q, then it is computationally hard to find an integer m such that P is equal to MQ, and this is not possible in polynomial time. Similarly, the other problem is elliptic curve computational Diffie-Hellman problem, in which we consider 3 points on the elliptic curve. Then it is difficult to find the multiplication of those 3 points in polynomial time. So these two problems associated with ECC, they provide the necessary security to the remote user authentication scheme. In addition, the hash function which we used is irreversible. So an attacker, if provides two different outputs to the hash function, it cannot identify the difference between the corresponding inputs. So this is again a security benefit to the scheme. And the scheme targets number of attacks, including password guessing, stolen smart card, parallel session, and impersonation. So it is resistant to these attacks. Considering the performance analysis, we try to implement the scheme, and I will discuss in the coming slides. So we focused on the performance of the scheme based on the time complexity of executing the hash operation and XOR operation, because we relied on these two operations, and the translation between the input and output by conducting these operations, how much time it is taken, it defines the performance benefits of the proposed scheme. Then how much time it was taken for the encryption and decryption operations to convert plain text to cipher text and vice versa. They were also considered as part of the performance analysis. And the key part is that since the scheme uses ECC, there are no costly exponential or modular operations that are involved in schemes like RSA. So it provides us a performance benefit on resource constrained devices to execute the operations. Then the scheme can work in multi-server environment. As I mentioned you previously, multiple application servers can store the application. They can work in parallel. And the scheme supports multi-factor authentication. It relies on the user's fingerprints, OTP, and the password to authenticate him. Then it can support multi-level authentication. As I said, there are 2 levels of authentication that undergo in this scheme. Then it can resist attacks that I'll be presenting you in the coming slides. And for resource constrained devices, it requires lower computational cost because of the low cost operations associated with the execution of ECC. So to implement the scheme, we were dependent on some tool support. So we made use of Avispa, which is automated validation of internet security protocols and applications. The tool is a push button research tool in which you can define your own security sensitive protocols and applications. For that, there is a language provided by the tool, which is a high level protocol specification language. It's a role-based language in which the role of the entities that are the part of the communication, it can be defined. Then there is a security protocol animator, which is part of the tool suite itself. And it is basically there to execute the scheme that you define using HLPSL. And it shows the stepwise execution of the scheme. So it also supports intruder mode, in which you can basically define the attacks in order to check whether the scheme performs well in the attacking scenarios or no. There are there's built-in code for that as well. Then we made use of ACPT, which is Access Control Policy Testing Tool, to define the security policies that are stored on the management server. So if we go to the results, as you can see in Avispa, this is the message sequence chart, which shows the normal execution of the scheme that we proposed in step-by-step manner, which basically you can see that it shows the entities like application, authentication, user, and management. So how they exchange the information in a step-by-step way. After the execution of scheme on Avispa, we can see there are basically some databases that show how much time this execution of the scheme takes. So there is first on the fly model checker, which shows that the search time for the scheme is 9.46 seconds, but this is not associated with what is happening in real time. It's the background check, basically to conduct security attacks on the scheme and to identify whether the scheme is safe, secure enough or no against those attacks. Then there is ATSC protocol summary, in which you can see were analyzed and reachable, because here we see the execution of scheme in terms of states and their transition. So how many states were basically reached during the execution. So the more the number of states are there, more complex will be the protocol. Then the tool access control policy testing tool. Basically in this tool, you can define the security policies in extensible access control markup language, as you can see in the picture. So here you can define the roles, the resources, basically that you want to secure, and there can be attributes associated with them. Then after executing the XACML access control policies in ACPT, it took like 203 milliseconds for the static verification, in which we just try to look for the structural aspects of the policies. And while executing them, the policies, the dynamic verification, it took about 0.109 seconds. And as you can see, the policies, they have been defined in access control markup language, but to the user, it shows like what are the different roles associated with the policies and what are the different attributes that you have defined. So while working on the prototype, we made use of a PIV key card, which is a Java card, and to embed the code, the scheme that we proposed on the card, we made use of Verasec tool and EID authenticate for using the smart card to log in into the system in the host computer. And we made use of Wireshark to analyze the transmission of packets, the traffic, actual traffic. And the key features, the security features associated with this Java card are it supports on-board key generation, that you can generate the security key using the application that you can install in your PC. Then it allows cryptographic mechanisms. There are default mechanisms as well, and you can deploy your own schemes. So the other thing was random number generation. It allows for generating random numbers for every execution of the transactions. And it supports pin-based two-factor authentication. Again, this is a default authentication mechanism, but you can define your own, as we did in our case. And it provides digital certificates that support public key infrastructure applications. For instance, you can log in to the Windows, you can log into your email accounts, you can sign a document digitally, and you can also use virtual private networks in order to log in remotely. So we started with setting up the system first. So it basically involves linking the card to the system. So in the software, it basically allows automatic installation of the same. Then once the this card is linked to the system, the initialization process is done, in which the necessary information is added to the ROM of the card. In this case, you can define your own PIN, or you can rely on the PIN generated by the application automatically. Then the policies, these are again the access control policies. You can rely on the automatically generated policies, or you can define your own policies, as we did in our case. We defined a management server separately, and we defined XACML policies that we try to embed in the card. Then there was the attachment of the certificate. This is optional. If you want to try the scheme that you have developed, in that case, you can omit this step, but this is like an extra security feature that you can use. Then the details associated with the smart cards were inserted. In this case, we defined some information specific to the user of the smart card, and we embedded the same in the card. Once the entire process is done, we can we can try to see if we can log into the system using the card or no. This is one of the applications of the card. So in this case, you have to enter the key, the PIN that you have chosen while initializing the card. So the login, after this login is successful, when you provide the right PIN, you can actually analyze the traffic using Wireshark. In this case, the possible attributes that we consider was the host computer. It is visible on the Wireshark outputs interface, and the card was this PKI based card with version 1.1.0. The protocol that it uses is USB hub for the transmission of information. So once it was done, we made an analysis of the possible attack types and how the scheme that we embedded on the card, it fights against these attacks. So starting with DNS spoofing, because we can rely on certificate-based mechanisms. In that case, the host machines cannot be they cannot pretend the attacking machines cannot pretend like genuine ones. And to prevent the unauthorized access, we relied on the pins, the private keys as well, that were generated automatically. Then the modification attack, which is associated with the integrity of the information. Here, if we try to prove ourselves that we are an authorized user, we can prevent this attack, which we did in this case by providing the PIN. Similarly, denial of sending message can be prevented because the card, it provides PKI based infrastructure to avoid the non-repudiation of the messages. Here the digital signatures basically come into picture. So for that, you can define your own signatures as well, which we did using the security policies in this case. Then to prevent the unauthorized access, it is again the same. We've made use of the PIN in order to restrict the access to the device. Then identity capturing attack can also be prevented because the transmission, it involves the anonymity of the information. So the actual information is not revealed on the interface. Similarly, eavesdropping can be avoided because the entire communication is involving a session key. And if the session key is not revealed, anyone cannot enter the session in order to capture the information. Then to prevent the private key disclosure, we relied on hiding the key in the form that, the key is not visible to the normal user. So it is in the encrypted form. The key itself is encrypted, so it cannot be exported to be reused by an attacker. Then to prevent the lack of trust between communicating entities, the certification authorities, they provide some certificates to the entities. So in our case, we relied on the certificates issued by the application to the user and to the Windows device. So to sum up, if we consider the recent technological advances in the field of smart card security, we can see that there is a feasibility to conduct researches in many areas associated with it. For instance, we can work on the security of the underlying application, the corresponding code related to the application and how it executes. We can work on the cryptographic aspects, which is related to the use of formal methods in order to secure the information. And we can go for a secure protocol development, the protocols that are there to establish communication between the devices. And we can work on embedded programming, like how to embed the code that you actually develop in order to secure the information. So that's all from my side. If you have any questions, you can ask.
So participant, if you have any question, you can directly ask or you can put in the chat box.
Sir, there are couples of questions. Sir, first question is from Ankur Lohachab. Can we consider attacks over remote user authentication as non-invasive attacks?
Okay, so thank you for this question. According to my knowledge, yes, the remote user authentication mechanisms, they involve the transmission of information without using the physical guards. And as I mentioned, non-invasive attacks, they involve like affecting the security of the card without penetrating into the chip. So yes, they can be considered as non-invasive attacks. Okay.
Next question is, ma'am, how one-way hash works?
Okay. So in one-way hashing, basically, you provide an arbitrary length string to the hash function, and it generates a fixed length string as an output. And this output is acting as a summary of the arbitrary string. So one cannot relate the corresponding bytes with the input string. So that's why we cannot revert back to the original information. Yeah, and I guess someone is asking me to share the presentation. Okay, that I can do if you can provide me some email ID to share the same. I would be happy to do that.
Okay, Megha, you can send to me. I can forward to them.
Okay, that's fine.
You can send the slide to me, then I can forward to them.
Okay, I will do it.
So, any more questions is there?
No, sir. Participants have asked about the PPT, if the PPT is available.
So, I also request to the Francisco. Francisco is there?
Yes,
So
I'm here.
Is it possible to share your PPT?
Yeah, it's a PDF, but yes.
Okay, then it is fine, because you see many are requesting to get that PPT. Okay, so if there is no question, though, thanks to Megha Kamara for her valuable speech,
Thank you very much,
and
Professor.
it will be helpful to our speaker participants, no doubt.
Thank you.
And you see, we are now going to the end of the session, and participants from participant and any if you have any suggestion about this webinar.
Sir?
Or hello.
So we have provided the feedback link, sir, for today's session.
Okay, feedback link. Okay, that then fine. So from speaker end, do you have any experience about this? And Francisco is there, then Akanksha is there, then Megha is also there. Any experience?
No, I think it was a nice thing. I mean, it's well organized, pretty nice. So.
And Megha and Akanksha.
Yes, Professor, I would like to say that considering the present situation of COVID-19, it's a good initiative from your side to exchange the skills, the knowledge with people. So I really appreciate this initiative. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Megha. Any comments about the webinar?
Thank you for the invitation, sir, and it was a very good experience. And you provided a great platform to us to share our knowledge. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you all, because you see we have started. This is the 9th session of the webinar, and we are having planned to many more sessions. So already many speakers from different countries of the world, they have given their speech. We are happy to thankful to them also, and I also thankful to the today's speakers, Dr. Francisco, Dr. Asanka, and Megha also. So we have share your knowledge to our participants. So thank you all, and thank you to the participant to attend the webinar, and for your presence. We are thankful to our honorable Vice Chancellor for his continuous support to and encouraging to us to organize such type of events in future, and for the betterment of the society, and as well as for the research community. And I also thankful to our webinar team, Mr. Prem Kumar. He has done a lot of work, and he has also helpful. He has very much helpful to organize such type of events. So thank you all, and you see we are having that next session on 10th October, and it will start at 5:30 p.m. around. So we are having the speaker from USA and Australia, and most probably two speakers from Australia and one speaker from USA. So we will also send you the link. So I will be happy that you join and share your knowledge again in that platform and on that 10th October. Okay, thank you all.